Welcome to your Mental Health Matters podcast, a community-minded mental health podcast providing real-life mental health talks supporting parents, educators, and students.
Hey, welcome back to Your Mental Health Matters. We're so excited for today's episode. We're going to be talking about bad behavior, emotional regulation, and executive functioning strategies for children and supporting for teachers and parents as well. So welcome, Mel. Welcome, Chantal.
Thank you. Such a big topic today. I think there's so much we can cover, but we really want to hone in on some specific things that everyone's feeling and some of the questions that some of our listeners have actually brought forward as well. So sorry, continue.
Yeah, so good. No, it's all good. And we are coming to you live from this beautiful studio. I'm not sure what you call this, but we're at McTavish School here.
Cole McTavish.
Yeah, exactly, right? And Conrad and Miguel, I should mention as well, they are our amazing tech teams. They support us each and every week. So we just want to say a shout out and thank you to both of them.
For making this dream come true.
This would not be possible without them. So they hang out with us and do all the hard work of doing the audio. So we just so want to thank and honor them and honor Conrad for sharing his space with us. Mm-hmm. It's so nice to be here. This is like a perfect setup. So.
It is, yes.
Yeah, so we'll dive into today's topic.
Right.
I know our first question here we have from a listener, kind of around that area of what are two main things you remind parents to do when their child is exhibiting some behavior or is emotionally dysregulated?
Want me to answer first?
Sure, let's dive in.
Go ahead.
Okay. I get so excited about these things, so sometimes I become a little bit too much of a keener, and I want to make sure everyone's having their time. I think the biggest thing is you have to be an investigator for your child, right? We all know that. We know even in our work as teachers, you have to investigate what's behind the behavior. To assume a child is crying just because is doing your child a disservice and your relationship, because oftentimes there will be ruptures that happen because you're not investigating what's behind, what environmental influences have caused them to be what they're feeling right now, what have they been exposed to during the day, and some of those things will lead you to, okay, this is why their stress is higher and that's why they're behaving. And then it helps you understand how to work with them.
Absolutely.
Right.
I would just jump in and add to that. Really, what I tell parents that I work with is that connection before correction. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time as adults, we get so dysregulated by the behavior, and it's so hard to look past the behavior.
Yes.
And we get so caught up in that we're not actually seeing the underlying need. So I always tell parents, if possible, be able to put the behavior aside. It's not that we're not going to come back to it, but that is not the time to address it. So what we want to do is actually take that time to connect and regulate, and then go back and reason and talk about consequences. And I know it's really hard, because I've had parents say to me, well, Chantal, that's great, but it's really hard to do that when I have a hole in my wall. Yeah. And I agree, it's not always going to be easy, but if you're able to do that in that moment, you get so much more information about what is under that emotion, and then you go back to the hole in the wall, right? Mm-hmm. Then you go back to the consequences, because we can't have that happening. But in that moment, it's more about the connection. We want that right brain to right brain connection, because when we're dysregulated, we don't have access to that prefrontal cortex.
That's it.
So as the adult, we need to use our brains to regulate our children.
So we're co-regulating with them, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And one of the biggest parts is looking at your own dysregulation.
That's right.
Totally.
Temperature check.
Yes, a dysregulated brain cannot regulate another brain.
Right.
So you need to make sure that you're regulated. So identifying what it looks like, sounds like, and feels like when you become dysregulated.
Yeah, I love that. The goal of discipline, really is connection. So being able to understand behavior is communication. And if I'm not able to understand what the child is trying to communicate, I might need just to take a step back and press pause, take 5 minutes. And of course, if there's another sibling and they're at each other, we have to take actions and make sure everyone's safe.
Safety first.
But aside from that, sometimes we just got to take a step back as parents or educators as well. Absolutely. And say, okay, what's kind of going on here? What's going on for myself? Why am I feeling a bit triggered or upset? And making sure that even for myself at home, sometimes if my children are having a harder day, putting on some music, doing some things to regulate myself, because a regulated parent is going to be able to support, hopefully, a regulated child. But if I'm not regulated, nothing's going to go well.
No.
So that, I think, is the first most important thing, is the two of you are sharing. And then really that connection piece, as I'm regulated, I'm understanding those underlying wants and needs. It's not just for children and parents, but it's for couples, it's for
All
really all
relationships.
relationships.
Yeah.
You know, that behavior or even, you know, mean words, whatever it might be, is communication.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
really, what's going on below the surface? We can see the tip of the iceberg, but let's get really interested in below the surface. What are my underlying wants and needs?
The Circle of Security has a great analogy, and I know I pull from Circle of Security,
But
but
it's fantastic.
it's a
so you should.
fantastic program. But they use the analogy that behavior is like a fire alarm.
Right. Yeah.
And if your fire alarm goes off and you grab your extinguisher and you hose off the alarm, the kitchen still burns.
Yeah.
So that underlying need is still not being met if you're
That's
only
right.
attending to the behavior,
That's
which
right.
I thought was a brilliant
That
analogy.
is brilliant. You know, and I even take it one step further with that is we talk about how recognizing where you are in yourself and that self-awareness. First thing that comes to my mind, and I go, I have the golden ticket because I have 5 kids, and I could say this to parents out there, that I get it, that you can't always be that person to stay regulated and calm, and sometimes you feed off each other. So parent and child are doing this, right? And it is very frustrating. But if there's a one thing I learned in all my parenting time is I do say, I need 5 minutes because
Yeah.
I'm about to say something
Yes.
that I don't mean, and
Totally.
I'm pretty sure you're about to say something you don't mean. And that works with the young ones as well as the old ones. The young ones, you don't need to articulate it quite as much. You just say, I need 5. I need my own space for a second. Then I do my own breathing, I do my own relaxation, and then I come back and I go, okay, keep it together, Mel. This is a child, and I do some self-talk to make sure that I'm okay, and then I deal with it. But that's not real world sometimes. Sometimes chaos happens, and we have to just deal with it in the moment. But we do need to check ourselves. Number one, we have to have that self-awareness. So parents, I would say to you, learning that self-awareness and understanding your child and the types of behaviors they exhibit are a really big piece of this.
Very true. Yeah, that concept of switching gears, being able to kind of get into a different space. Let's get out of the house, let's go for a drive, whatever it might be, but just getting ourselves and sometimes our kids into a different space too.
And I think I just want to add an important part to that. Taking that time away, letting them know that you'll be back. That this isn't the
Yeah.
end, that I'm not leaving you
So
in this.
true.
That's a
that
good point.
I'm going to be back. Because I had one parent one time who said, well, I walked away like I was supposed to.
But they chased you or
didn't
followed you.
articulate that they would be back.
Right.
Yes.
Right? So you're like, oh yeah, I forgot that part. So
Right.
making sure you let them know, like, I'm not leaving you in this. It's just right now I need
Yeah.
some time.
Because you
Yeah.
don't want them to feel distressed, right?
Yeah.
And you're walking
Or
away, and you're running in
rejected.
the opposite direction, and your child's chasing you. Mom, Dad, that's not the goal here.
No.
But it is articulating, getting down to their level, and connecting with them that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And one of my daughters has pretty significant separation anxiety, so for me just to leave the room is very upsetting for her. So we kind of have to switch gears together, even if I'm having a hard time.
Right.
The two of us kind of go into a different space. Maybe she's doing her own thing, I'm doing my own thing. But sometimes, depending on your child, you might have to do it together, but in your separate spaces in the same room or what have you as well.
And I think that's a really good point too, because it's going to look different for every kid,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you have 2 kids, it's going to look different for each kid.
Parent them differently.
Yeah.
I have 5 kids. I parented them all very differently based on what they bring to the table. And what I have in my, if I'm full that day, I may only be parenting at 50% capacity, right? Like that's another piece of this, is what you're bringing at the end of the day and your stressors. You still have to parent those kids, and you bring forward what you have, but you try to articulate it in a way that's respectful, and you're not making the child feel less than, or you're condemning them or making them feel fearful, which brings us to the next topic.
Yeah, and I
right?
think that's a really good point for educators as well, because this has been a very difficult school year for staff and for counselors and
Yes.
and for students. And so I think having that grace with yourself as an
Yeah.
educator, knowing that some days you're going to go in at 50% and
Yep.
you're going to do the best that you can that day with what you have to give.
So in those kind of moments, dealing with bad behavior and discipline, I think it's probably one of the most common questions I've been asked, and we've probably all been asked about supporting children, supporting
Yes.
students. What really is, let's talk about discipline in terms of the goal of discipline and how do we define it in a constructive, supportive way, both at school and at home.
That's a really good one. I think when it comes to discipline, one of the key factors in discipline is making sure that the consequence matches the behavior.
Yeah, I would even take the word discipline right out of that, or out of it, and say consequences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
Discipline sounds so harsh. When you think about discipline, I think about punishment.
That's exactly it.
right. Like
yeah,
like bad.
that's right.
right. But if children could do better, they would do better.
That's
So
right.
true.
Right. So again, like talking about the consequences and making sure that they match the behavior because kids need that link,
They do.
right?
Yeah. So true. So true. I know Siegel and Bryson and No Drama Discipline, a great book. My wife and I read it. It's really good. It helps us as parents too.
Absolutely.
They say the goal of discipline is to say no to the behavior, but yes to the child. It's all about connecting and
Go more
directing.
with that. I love that. Say
Right.
that no to the behavior, but yes,
Yes
to the child.
exactly. So instead of reacting, lecturing, spanking, timeouts, etc., ask ourselves 3 simple questions. Why did my child act this way? What lesson do I want to teach in this moment? And how can I best teach this lesson?
Love this.
I do love that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still learning it too, right?
And it is a work in progress because even though you know it logically, applying it is very different in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I agree completely. And so are you finding it's working in your household?
Well, I think it's a process, right? Like you said, on a great day, yeah, it works great. But sometimes, you know, you just get a little bit frustrated with certain behaviors, and there's 2 sides of it. Even my wife and I are having conversations. We care deeply about our kids, you know, and our one child's very sensitive, so we tend to maybe be on the more lenient side of parenting. So we're even having to kind of retool and think, okay, maybe there's certain things we need to be a little bit more clear about, and be able to still say yes to our children, but be a little bit more clear on saying no to some of those behaviors.
And when you're saying no to the behaviors, are you saying that, do you and your wife have a list of things that you will, the best way to describe this is there are things where parents both agree on. They go, these are the things that we agree to. These are the things. This is the hill we're going to die on.
Right. Yeah.
We're going to fight this one because we do not appreciate. Will not tolerate this. In my house, it is as simple as an eye roll.
Right.
You do not roll your eyes because that's disrespect. And if I rolled at one of my kids, they would see that as a sign of disrespect, and all of a sudden that ruptures our relationship. And it takes time. It happens, and there's been times where I have accidentally didn't mean to do the eye roll, but I kind of did, and they call me out, and in the moment I'm frustrated, and I don't like it when my kids get one over on me that way, but I say, you're right. I shouldn't have done that. That's a respect thing. We have to be respecting each other. So owning up to the part that you play as a parent as well.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think that's so important. And I think, like, let's not pretend. Parenting is hard, okay?
Totally. Yeah.
Parenting is hard, and I think everybody does the best that they can. But as a human, sometimes we get in these power struggles.
Yes.
And we actually lose sight of what the actual goal is.
Yeah,
Like you
true.
were talking about the lesson that you wanted to learn. Sometimes we lose sight of that because we get dysregulated or we fear we're losing control of the situation. And sometimes we need to jump in and feel like we need to take back control.
Yeah.
My husband calls it when an unmovable object meets an unstoppable force.
Right.
Right? So then it just becomes a power struggle.
Yeah.
And that's a lose-lose situation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I know a really common example of that is fear.
Exactly.
Some of the parents I work with say, well, they need to fear me. I need to have fear. Fear is healthy. And I would disagree. I think fear of a parent is harmful for a child. Fear of a consequence is okay.
That's point there, right there.
But the
fear of the
fear of
consequence
the
is okay.
parent is actually can be actually very harmful to children,
Absolutely.
especially as they get older, because they no longer see you as a resource.
That's right.
They're no longer coming to you with those bigger problems.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that always stick out to me is internet safety.
Right.
I know that in the past there's been a client who struggled with that, where they've been approached online by an adult and they don't know how to talk to parents about
Because
that
they're
kind
afraid
of
they're
thing.
going to get in trouble.
Because they're afraid they're going to get into trouble,
Yeah.
right? And that kid had an adult that they trusted, that they could talk to.
Right.
But imagine a child who doesn't have an adult to give them that advice and push them in that direction. So I think fear of the consequence is okay, but not fear of the parent.
And this speaks to the attachment as well. When
Exactly.
you don't trust your parent, you will not go to them. And that's perpetuating through their life, which also could amplify any mental health issues, any concerns, any barriers, that any stressors they have in their life. They're not going to go to you if you don't talk to them about the little things. And if they fear you, they don't know what to expect. Kids need consistency, and they need to know what to expect. If they do A, you do B. If you do C, they do D. The more they know that, the more they're going to go, okay, yeah, my mom or dad's going to be upset, but they love me and we'll get through it.
Yeah, because you want your kids to come to you. You don't
You
want
do.
them to go to Google or their teenage friends. That's
Oh my,
not where
you
you
do
want
not.
them to go.
No, exactly.
Such a great point. So growing up, with younger children, that fear-based approach might work for a while, but long term, it's kind of a lose.
Yes,
And then
it
the flip
is.
side of it, because that relationship can be so important, sometimes we might just want to really be super easy on the discipline as well,
Yeah.
which sometimes not giving children enough parameters, consequences, etc., might not also set them up for success in life.
That's
So
right.
how do you find that balance? How do you find that middle ground between,
It's a great question.
right, being
Firm
consistent,
enough.
exactly, firm, fair, flexible, I always say,
Yeah.
but then also knowing that your children can come to you with anything too.
Well, I think the fact that if your child does come to you
Yeah.
and you're able to respond to them, you know your children, and if they shut down when you start talking to them, there's something you said with the verbally or with your body language that has shut them down.
Yeah.
So to say what the parameters are specifically, I don't know if we can actually say this is when
Totally.
it is.
Exactly.
However, when your child comes to you about something little that maybe a minor issue, handling them with a little bit of respect and saying,
Yeah.
tell me more about that. Thank you for coming to me about this. I appreciate the fact that you trusted me with this. How can we talk about this? Right? And problem solve. If you talk at your child's never going to feel like they have part of the decision making. And that goes into their teenage years.
Exactly.
The more you problem solve together and work out
Yes.
the consequences, then you're able to go, okay, as a teenager, my mom or dad has always been fair with me because they listen to me and we talk it out.
Yeah.
If it's a one-sided argument or a one-sided conversation, your child will be shut down. And you'll see it. It's so clear when a child is shut down.
I think that's a great plug for the leader in me.
It is.
Think win-win. Have it number
Right.
4.
That's right.
So have that solution, have that conversation so that they're a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And because if one person wins and the other loses, both lose in long
That's right.
term.
That's
Yeah.
what it is, right?
I actually talk a lot about that with kids and parents. I say we have to find win-wins.
Yeah.
For younger children, it's like the group plan versus our own plan. The own plan is a lose-lose. The group plan is a win-win. And even with teens, they'll use different language. But how do we find a win-win here? Because it's not teaching our children what to think, but teaching them how to think. And putting the ball in their
Yes,
court is a
problem solving.
huge part of discipline. Because that's the goal. If we ask ourselves again, being able to ask, what can I teach my kids?
That's right.
It's not our lectures that they're going to learn from,
No.
but it's their own kind of thoughts and feelings and reflections on that. So in terms of how the brain responds to discipline, I stole this from you, Mel, so credit to you. The brain can respond in an offline or online way. The offline is the brain stem and limbic system, from spanking, shouting, that engages the downstairs brain, the amygdala, and not a lot of learning is happening
Nothing.
in those moments.
No, that's right.
And then we have the neocortex, that's the online brain.
That's right.
Hugs, asking good questions, helping us think about these things.
Eye contact.
Right?
Yes, right. Because those are feel-good producing chemicals that are going to go through your body when you're working with your child and connecting with your child. Those feel-good chemicals are going to get you to bond and talk and attach and connect. They're going to come back online and they're going to be able to focus and hear you. They're going to have memory recall about what you're saying because they are engaged up here, not back there. It is so essential. Going back to our other episode where we talked about fight-flight, that's what it is. If they are in fight-flight, you can't reason with them then. So this whole behavior piece, you're seeing them in fight-flight, that looks like straight-up behavior, temper tantrum. But what if it's just a child that's really dysregulated and you need to connect, get back to their level, eye contact, heart racing, so you have to regulate with them, your heart matches their heart, and then they come back online, like you said, happy, fun, connect, then they're ready to listen.
Yeah.
And they'll actually, their body will remember that.
They will.
The next
It
time
will.
that something goes wrong, they'll
Yep.
remember that connection and that safe place and that
That's
safe
it.
person.
Yeah,
And they're more likely then to come back in.
yeah.
I think all of this is great, but I do not want people to think that this is easy.
Right.
It's not
Right? Like
easy.
we have the information, we've studied it, we know it, but it's not always easy and you're gonna lose it.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
I think that you need to be compassionate with yourself. And when you do lose it, there's something that you can do, that repair afterwards. The quality of that repair determines the quality of relationships.
And what does Circle say? 30% of the time you only
30% of the time seems to be good enough,
enough.
to
Yeah.
create that secure attachment.
That's it. The secure attachment is so a big piece of that is we do need to feel, we are going to make mistakes. One of the best things that people will ask me is what makes a good parent? I don't think I'll let you know when I figure that out myself because I'm still trying to figure that out. But a parent will make mistakes, but I would say a good parent learns from their mistakes
Totally.
and
Yes.
tries to do better the next time.
I tell my clients all the time, because I think I've done over 100 sessions of circle of security, and I tell them, eventually in 2 or 3 years when I have my own child, you are going to see me at the grocery store yelling at my child.
Pulling your hair out.
Look away.
Yeah.
Look away.
Just
'Cause nobody
don't
is
judge me.
perfect.
Mind your business.
Yeah.
But I think an important part of that rupture and repair is that being able to reflect on yourself.
That's
What
right.
went wrong for you as well as what went wrong for them. And talking about it
Yeah.
without the shame.
Yeah, so
Without
true.
the shame.
Because that's the important part, is that we all lose it.
That's it.
Even
very
kids,
true.
Yeah.
even adults. So being able to go back after and repair and talk about where you both went.
Yeah.
I love what you're talking about there, Chantel, in regards to no one's perfect. We're going to be in moments where we're having difficulties as parents, and our children will be in those moments too. So what we do in those moments is really important. And probably the question we're all thinking and wondering is, what happens? Let's say we've got Johnny, 6 years old, gets super upset when technology is turned off, just having a complete meltdown. What do we do in a situation like that, when the child's just really, really struggling?
I'm having deja vu. I had this question so many times.
You want to take lead? Go ahead.
To be honest, the tech one is honestly one of the most asked questions.
It is.
Because it's so hard to take that tech, and kids get so upset. I think this comes back into that balance, right? Being able to set boundaries around it and being able to stay firm on them, regardless of that big tantrum. And when that big tantrum does happen, being able to, again, being able to be with in that moment. And you might actually have to hold the child at that time, but being present in the moment without becoming dysregulated yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it might be that hold, it might be that pressure, or they might need to walk away and be alone for a little bit. It will look different for different children, but looking at the specific cues from your child, if they need that space, give them that bit of space. But I think it's so important to never leave kids alone with emotions that they can't regulate to regulate on their own.
That's a
Totally.
good point. So
Right?
you need to co-regulate because they don't know how. They don't have the ability on their own to regulate.
No, but looking for that time to go in, because if you have a child that is full on meltdown
Losing
on the
their
floor,
mind.
losing their mind, screaming, it is going to be really hard then to be with. So sometimes you need to take a break as a parent, right? As long as your child is safe,
Yeah.
sometimes you need to take that step away, like you were saying earlier, and yeah, take that step away, relax, get yourself regulated, and get back in there and see what is needed in that moment. And don't be afraid to hold, right? That tight pressure on the nervous system when we're dysregulated
Yeah.
helps soothe it and relax us.
Yeah. And I think when I'm hearing kids having a meltdown and parents they get panicky. They're like,
Yeah.
what do I do? How do I stop it? You just want to stop it. And sometimes that's trying to relieve your own pressure and stress.
Totally.
Yes.
But sometimes you just got to let the child run the wave of it, just ride the wave, and you don't engage them in a full conversation because again, they're back there in that emotional brain anyway, right? So let them have the temper tantrum. You just sit back and you just like, you're fine, you're okay, and you just let them be. But what I think the bigger part of this is we need to be front loading this information prior to that. We
Yeah.
don't go 8 o'clock bedtime, no video games past 7:30, and then we enforce it the first night without doing the front loading of it.
Good luck.
So exactly, so you're front loading it maybe for that week prior. Maybe you're saying, okay, there's a timer. Oh, at 7:30, at 8 o'clock, no more video games. Remember, we agreed to this because they negotiated, remember? Parenting, if they're talking in their negotiating time, if the child feels like they're part of the problem, the solution, I should say, then they may agree to it more.
Yeah.
So they have the meltdown because they forget the rules you agreed to. You calm them down, you be with, as Chantel said, and then you remind them of the rules and say, do you remember the rules we agreed to? Once they're back online in that thinking brain, because you can't engage them when they're having the meltdown.
Exactly.
And validating. I know it's really hard
It's
to give up
frustrating.
your iPad. I mean,
Exactly.
I think about if you said that to an adult, okay, time to put down your phone now, no more phone.
My husband would take a temper tantrum.
Right? So validate that it is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, and I know that you really want to keep going, but I really care about your well-being at school tomorrow, and I know that if you don't sleep well,
Yeah.
then your days are off, and I want you to have a really good day
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
school. So being able to talk about the intention behind your behavior
Yeah.
and why you're doing what you're doing, and it's not just because you're mean.
That's right. And that means the same for the teenagers as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Teenagers are a little bit further. You want to use their peers in negotiating as much as possible because their peers have more influence over them than you
Right.
do.
Oh, absolutely.
So you want to negotiate back and forth some of these routines, things, boundaries, and whatnot. However, you also want to have that teenage piece in there. So if they're saying, okay, 10 o'clock is no more screen time, because blue screens, we know
Yeah.
that what they interrupt our sleep rhythm. They cause us to stay wakeful more. Video games cause us to be more stimulated in our brain. Those feel-good chemicals are going through our brain. Teenagers are just loving that, and they just want to play games all night. One of the things I say to my teenager, if he's struggling to get up in the morning, is, how late were you on your stuff? And
Yeah.
he'll try sometimes to fib, but then, I mean, they're on
Parents know.
Facebook. We see them. I see the comments. I see all the things on Instagram because as a parent, I'm going to be on all of his accounts as well so that I can. And I say I have three boys and 2 girls, so they. But you talk to them and say, okay, so natural consequence, maybe you're just not ready to have a phone in your room
Yeah.
right now.
Exactly.
Maybe that's
Making
not a
the
good idea.
consequence meet the behavior
Exactly.
and match.
That's it. So you're not getting mad at them saying, you're losing your phone. You're just saying, I could see that must be really hard to be pull away from your friends at night. And I get that because sometimes you get engaged in some of that. But maybe it's best if you're just not ready to have your phone in your room at night. Maybe we could just leave it out here for tonight, see if you have a better sleep, and we could renegotiate tomorrow. Would that
Yeah.
be okay?
Love
Okay.
that.
Right.
So good. You think about connection-based discipline, waiting till your child's ready, whether it's in the moment or sometimes just privileges they're not able to handle.
Yeah.
You know, one of our daughters, I've got to be honest, as a parent, I'm a little bit of an anxious parent. You know, when the technology is coming up, you're like just sometimes bracing for it. You're like, oh
Wait
man,
for it.
I hope this goes well. So it can sometimes lead a person to be a little bit more lenient maybe
Yep.
than they should, right? Confession time here. But even in that, just kind of recognizing, okay, firm, fair, flexible, follow through.
Yeah.
And I have to reflect on that even for my own parenting. Okay, Joel, it's going to be easier if I just stick to it this time. It's going to get easier next time. And over time it has, right? Our one daughter still takes a nap. So the other daughter, well, daughter 1 is napping, daughter 2 has a little bit of time where she watches her show that we carefully monitor and a few learning apps, right?
Right.
But she knows it's the time to watch when the
Right.
other daughter's sleeping.
Right.
So she has that same routine every day, same
So
expectations.
important.
So that's really helpful. Usually getting off is okay, but sometimes it's challenging. And as I mentioned before, for our one daughter, the idea of just shutting it down and hoping things go well.
Right.
If she's having a hard time, she's typically amping up.
Yeah.
But switching gears, even just let's just go upstairs until
That's
you're
it.
calm, until
Yeah.
you're ready. I find the whole idea of the drama part of discipline or children really having a hard time, very unregulated, is scary for me as a parent. Let's say if I'm at the in-laws' house or my parents
Sure,
or
'cause
out
you
in
think
the
they're
public.
judging you or whatever, right?
It's stressful.
It
So
is
one
very.
thing that really helps me is just getting out of that situation and saying, okay, daughter, let's just go take a little break here. It'll
I
just
love
be you
that
and me.
because
We'll
it's
have
also
a little
connection. You're
time.
co-regulating as well.
Exactly, right? And then we'll come back to the big group when we're ready.
Yeah.
So there's no magic formula, I think, in those moments.
Right.
So sometimes the best thing to do is just get in a different space.
There's
Yeah.
also no shame in that.
Exactly, right?
Like, I think we will definitely do an episode on screen time and addiction to screen time and how to regulate that.
It's a huge
because
topic.
It is a really huge topic. So we will definitely dive into that a little bit more
Yeah.
in future sessions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so good. Yeah, and then the other piece of emotional regulation is this idea of executive functioning. We know that sometimes impulsivity and emotional regulation, all those different areas go hand in hand. So I thought we'd talk a little bit more about that area of executive functioning. Of course, sometimes that can be associated with ADHD or attention difficulties, but not always the case. So let's talk a little bit about how executive functioning can impact the area of emotional regulation and discipline as well.
And I think you hear parents saying, "I think my child has ADHD," or "I think they need to be tested for it because they can't pay attention, or they're more impulsive and they're not listening to me. They can't stay on task, or they have bad behaviors, right? And so they don't really know what it is, but they're trying to interpret the behavior to figure out what's happening.
Totally.
And sometimes it may not be ADHD, it could be trauma. It could be something that impacted their life that has caused them to be so dysregulated.
Yeah.
That hypervigilant, right, fight-flight response, and it kind of looks the same as ADHD.
Totally.
Right?
Exactly.
Like you look at the two and it's hard to determine which one is which. So you need to know a little bit of history about the child in order to determine, is this ADHD? Is this trauma? Is there something else going on in the child's life recently, lack of sleep, other areas of environmental factors that could potentially showing the same symptoms that ADHD has?
Very true.
Absolutely. I did a training a few years ago in dyadic developmental psychotherapy, and it's based on attachment. They did a study and they found that they had participants who had diagnosed with ADHD, and they went through the attachment program and the attachment therapy, and it reduced 80% of ADHD
Wow. Yeah.
symptoms.
80%.
80%.
So are you saying that 80% of individuals with ADHD may not necessarily have a diagnosis truly of
I think that's
ADHD?
a huge generalization.
Okay, because that's a huge
But
number. I wanted to
in
say
this
that for
one,
us.
Yeah, in that one
Yeah.
study, right,
Right.
with the specific population. But I thought that was very eye-opening because a lot of people don't understand that trauma can look very similar
Yes.
to
It
ADHD.
sure can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just being able to recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Joel, you could speak about this on many levels.
Totally, yeah. Like I
Because-
myself having ADHD, more of the inattentive side of things. I know sometimes it's kind of funny. I'll come home from work and my wife's like, Joel, you need to like go for a walk or something. You're kind of dysregulated, you know?
What do you look like when you're dysregulated?
You could ask my wife. She'll tell you. I'd say more just fidgety, you know, just more fidgety. I'm just kind of, it's actually funny. Whenever I come home from a trip too, if I'm traveling for work or things, I like to come home and just have some decompressed time.
Of course.
You know, so just even 5 minutes just to get my things in order, organize, things like that. So I think it really impacts us all differently. But a
Right.
key piece of emotional regulation is just understanding some of those other factors. For me, a lot of it's like light and sound as well. There's other individuals who've been diagnosed with sensory processing disorder, but for
Right.
me, I wouldn't say I'd fit criteria for that diagnosis, but bright lights, I do not like them.
Bright.
Loud sounds, no
Right.
thank you. Some of that stuff can contribute to dysregulation
Absolutely.
as well.
Because, I mean, you look at even just anxiety. Myself, I have anxiety, and bright lights, loud noise very much so impacts me. And I become very dysregulated, and I have to remind myself when I go to a busy grocery store concert, I'm shut down at a concert because it's just too much, right? And we all have to function that way with what we're given in life. So for you, Joel, and your ADHD, tell us a little bit about, you talk about the 3 types, because you talked
Sure.
about yours, the attentive type,
Yeah.
inattentive type.
Yeah, so there's symptoms that are related to inattentive type, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. So kind of 3 different strands that can kind of come together in different ways. Some people might have a combined presentation of presenting with all of those, and some might have more than others, you know?
Right.
So I think the big thing to think about as we look at these symptoms and how it impacts emotional regulation is just kind of being aware of what are some of those things. If I'm more hyperactive,
Right.
then I probably need to do more activities to regulate myself and kind
Right.
of focus myself, right?
That's right.
If I'm more inattentive, maybe I might need to do some things that energize myself or kind of bring me to the place where my focus and attention is there.
Right.
So just kind of being aware of those things, and especially for the impulsivity. We see this a lot for especially younger children.
So
they
true.
can seem to present with a severe behavioral difficulties. and
Yes.
Often maybe it's kindergarten to grade 3 where we really see some really pronounced behaviors. And I always remind parents with an ADHD prognosis involved in that, you know, typically we see things getting better. You know, for some students, they do require medical support. And of course, there's different medical supports out there to consult doctors and specialists in that area to look more into that. But for some children, it really helps just slow their brain down and be able to help them focus and learn some of these discipline skills that we're talking today. So there's some children who don't require medication too. So
Right.
every child's at a different place. But we can see, especially for those children with ADHD, a lot of support strategies around executive functioning, structure, consistency at home. If we can help build those in our children, typically we do see a little bit less behavioral difficulties as they get older and they have those strategies and supports. For me as an adult, I honestly only learned it as an adult. I never really had severe behaviors, but I'd be very dysregulated.
Right.
So modeling and coaching and labeling it, what zone of emotion am I in,
Right.
and what do I need, really helps me. And some people, I'd say females have a better prognosis in being more aware that way
Right.
and regulating their emotions. But especially young boys, that's really quite
Right.
a challenge. So
Right.
they need a lot of tools,
Yep.
coaching, zones of regulations, different programming around social skills and emotions
Yeah.
to explicitly learn what some other children might implicitly just pick up automatically.
I really like that last sentence, to explicitly learn what other kids pick up on implicitly. So
Yeah.
they just have that idea, they just know.
Mhm.
Whereas for some children, it's more of a challenge. So they need to be taught, they need to be mentored, they need people in their life to help support them with that. And schools will support with that. Schools are well versed in children with ADHD and how to work with them. I know, here's a plug. This is not a plug. I didn't write this or anything, but Managing ADHD in School, Russell Barkley. This is a really great book for helping us understand what ADHD looks like in our kids in school, and some really great strategies, as well as even the benefits of medication if indeed your child does need to be put on a medication. Like you said, not all children need to, because the tools that you provide, they may be enough to help them work through it. But it's the awareness piece, understanding what the child is presenting with, and then working with what you have. Because a lot of times we don't know.
And I think when it comes to medication, some parents can be scared of it.
Of course,
And
absolutely.
I absolutely understand it. And not all children will need to be medicated for ADHD, but those children that do, once they have that medication, their internal world can change.
Completely.
And you can hear students talk about the difference in their brain when they are medicated, because that internal world suddenly feels just a little bit more manageable. Now I can focus on this task, even just a little bit more, and it's so amazing, because then kids are even able to look and say, hey, look, I can do this today.
That's right.
I couldn't do that before.
That confidence they get, that intrinsic feeling of, I got this.
Yes.
Kids need that, and if you want to reinforce something and to teach them to learn and grow and go on a trajectory of good mental health, we need to give them that internal feeling of, I got this.
Totally.
That it's okay, I can handle this, my self-worth is good, and I'm able to cope. And sometimes strategies work alone, but sometimes medication is important as well. And that's something you discuss with your physician and your school, and testing can be done.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and that side of things, I do a lot of the testing side of the things in the schools. And one
Right.
thing I always ask parents and teachers, are these attention difficulties or emotional regulation difficulties impacting your child academically, socially and emotionally as well,
That's
right?
it.
Because
There's the
sometimes
three.
there's minor impact. Well, that's fine. That's great. No concerns. We'll throw a few strategies and supports, right? But when we're seeing those severe impacts, especially around behavior, we don't want a child to struggle like that. It's
No.
very hard for a child to have those behavioral difficulties in
That's right.
themselves. They can feel like a bad kid, or they can feel guilt
Yeah.
or shame or those types of things. So conversations I often get to have with parents is really setting a child up for success.
Yeah.
How do we build their confidence? How do we make them feel powerful, in control of their emotions, and giving them the tools to really feel successful?
Right.
And we do the interventions in terms of social skills training and emotional regulation supports, building their toolbox. But if we're seeing those not having the outcomes we want, maybe there are medical supports as well that's going to help the child be more successful at learning those things.
That's right.
So that way, in 2, 3, or 4 years from now, this isn't kind of a lifelong or school-long trajectory, but we're able to really support those behaviors well and build success to some of these skills. And kind of circling back on our whole conversation about discipline, emotional regulation, bad behavior, I really think the goal for me anyway is developing mindset for the child to understand their own feelings and also understanding the feelings of others. It's
Yes,
never
yes.
too young to start teaching that. Our daughter's
That's
pretty
right.
sensitive, and she picks up on it pretty quick. But when I say, hey, Dad's angry right now, I'm not
Yep.
yelling, I'm not upset, but I say it in that right voice. Dad's angry right now, or he's upset about this, or I'm sad about that.
Yep.
Wow, that really impacts my daughter in a positive way to get her attention and adjust her behavior. Of course, it's something we don't want to have children feeling the burdens of their parents' emotions and
Of
being
course.
very mindful of the appropriate disclosures as parents. But when it comes to chatting directly about our child's behavior, building that mindset of how do you think you're making your sister or brother feel? How do you
That's
think you're making mom and dad feel? Building that awareness for our children is so important.
Bringing them
so
that
key.
emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah.
Giving language to their behavior and their actions is really important, because they'll learn off of that, and it'll become they'll be able to recall it for the next time, and then you'll be able to use it for the next conversation. Do you remember when we did this? Build off of past experience and past examples. That's the best way children learn. Do you remember when you had success when you did A, B, C, and D? That's how children learn, through repetition and memory, but you have to use words and you have to put their emotions to words so they can understand it.
And I want to go back to what you said a little bit earlier about building that confidence. That's not only true with children with ADHD, but any child that has struggled with emotional dysregulation.
Completely.
Helping them learn these skills can actually increase their self-esteem. And we know when children have a higher self-esteem, they just do better in life. They do better academically, with jobs, with peer relationships. They just do better.
They thrive.
They do. So
Yep.
having that ability to regulate your own emotions is actually such an asset to a child. So starting that as young as you can, right? And I think a lot of what we talked about here today is a lot of great tips and strategies on how to do that.
Yeah, so good. And it takes a village to raise a child. So let's talk about those supports, not just as a parent building your toolbox, but what supports might we have at our schools and our local community as well that can help us and partner with parents in supporting emotional regulation.
Well, of course, you go to your counselor into school. The counselor can help work with your child. Give them those tools. Teach them zones of regulation. Teach them some of the words that express how they're feeling.
And Mel, I know at the Catholic board, we have a counselor assigned to each school.
Yes,
some
us
are
as well.
part-time at a school. So is it the same for the public?
It is, yes. So no matter what school your child's in this division, the two divisions, they can access that support. That's important, right? And their teachers. Their teachers can learn. Their teacher works with the staff, whether it be the LAC or the CSD, depending on which division you're at. They will work with what the child brings. So if the child is we see, okay, there's an inattentive type, what kind of strategies can we put in place for that teacher? And then those strategies can be also talked to the parents about so they can follow through at home. You're not doing this by yourself. And I think that's the biggest piece of this is parents feel so overwhelmed and they don't know where to turn. But the school will take on a big piece of that because it's what we do every day.
Exactly.
And at the Catholic board, we have mental health therapists and psychologists available as well for those higher need students.
That's
what about
right.
at the
At the public as well. Yeah.
Amazing. So we are very well versed in supporting families, and that's what we want to do. That's what we're here to do. So reach out to school counselors, reach out to your kiddos' teacher, and discuss that, because we have so many supports that people aren't aware of, and I think that it's underutilized.
It is.
Not that I have a lot of room on my caseload,
Right.
but
Don't be calling me.
but not everybody knows about the supports in
That's
the
it.
school.
It's really amazing. It truly is amazing. I work in different districts and different things too, and it amazes me, to be able to assess a student or work with a student who has severe emotional, behavioral difficulties or severe attention difficulties, and to have these supports available provided by the school districts is incredible.
It's
Say, okay,
important.
not only for the child but for the family. How can we support you? How can we walk with you? And other individuals and supports available as well. Such great connection between medical supports and school supports in this community. So just know, as parents, we're here to support you as a team.
That's right.
We really want to work
Well said.
together and support. And I just get to be kind of the synergy that brings it together in some of my meetings.
That's
but
right.
You're the team. You're the people who are making it happen. And I just thank you for the amazing work that you do in supporting these kids.
It
and
is a
families.
village.
It's amazing.
Right? We
Yeah.
do it all together and we all take a part of it. But we want to see our children succeed. Period.
Some days it feels like a city.
Right?
It is, right?
And then we also, speaking of the city, we also have a lot of really great resources within our community as well.
That's right.
And as a school board, we definitely partner with a lot of them. So just to give a shout out to some of them, some other solutions, they have counseling available there. They also have the crisis line. We have legacy counseling, waypoints, and other resources would be the Family Resource Network, YMCA, CMHA, and the Youth Hub, just to name a few. So definitely, if you're feeling a little bit lost and overwhelmed, there's people that you can turn to, and there's support out there for everyone. Nobody has to go through this alone.
And I think depending on what the needs are will be depending who you refer to. And your counselor at the school can help with that. They may not be able to work with the parent and counsel them, but they provide information and then bridge the gap and get them the support in the community. And that's the important piece. After the child leaves that school or after the day is over, the parent still has support in the community. And that's really important, that they're not doing it alone. No.
So good. So as we wrap up today's session, tell me what's one thing that really stood out? One thing, that just is like the number one thing, or you want to put into practice in your own life as you think about parenting and teaching and supporting children with behavioral difficulties or with emotional regulation difficulties?
I think for me is being able to take that step back and realize that it has nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Not taking the behavior personally and being able to stay regulated.
Yeah.
And I know it's easier said than done. I'm human. Some days I get annoyed, some days I get frustrated, some days I give in.
Yeah.
But really trying to stay present in that and understanding that it often has nothing to do with me and that they need me in that moment.
That's a great one. And I would just take that one step further for myself. It's teaching my children not only what respect looks like, but how to respect.
Great.
And in everything I do, in all of my actions with them, and that is including listening to the same story about Pokemon 20,000 times, even though I'm exhausted and don't want to hear it for the 20,001st time. But you do it because then that builds a connection. And if you respect them and you listen to them, they'll respect you and listen to you.
Yeah.
What about
So
yourself,
good.
Joel?
Well, I'm kind of cheating because I talk about this a lot, but I'd say connection-based discipline.
Yeah.
It's not a parent disciplining a child, but it's actually a team process where we're teaching our children how to understand their feelings and understand the feelings of those around them. So
Right.
it's doing it together, I think, really is the key thing for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great,
Love
great
that.
stuff. Yeah.
So good. Well, thanks for joining us today on another episode of Your Mental Health Matters, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Please reach out to us if you have questions or comments about today's topic, or questions or suggestions for future topics. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, we encourage you to reach out to local agencies for support, as our podcast is not a substitute for counseling. If you require immediate support, please contact the crisis line or your local hospital.